Exposition of Daniel. You know, sometimes there are some characters, when you study them, it is very difficult even to analyze them within a few minutes. Praise be to God. Because there is a lot that has been written about them. There is much which they have accomplished, and we as Christians, we ought to borrow. Good to see your VC here. She's my colleague now in the other compound, and she's doing well, amen, teaching the boys mathematics and other stuffs. So we are keeping her well, as you can see. She's doing well. Praise be to God. An exposition of Daniel, and we will not take a specific verse, but you can be closer to the book of Daniel. Praise be to God. You can be sure that is where we shall be taking much of our verses from, if not all of them. But we cannot talk about Daniel unless we understand who Daniel is. Praise be to God. So that is where we shall begin, by asking ourselves that who is Daniel? Now we need to understand Daniel, the Daniel we shall be referring to, and I hope that is the one the union purposed me to talk about, is Daniel the prophet. Praise be to God. Because we'll realize we have other Daniels mentioned in the Bible. So I'm going to refer to the Daniel the prophet, who is the author of the book of Daniel. Now you will understand that Daniel was a young man of a Jewish nobility. By the time Daniel is being introduced to us in chapter 1, we are seeing a young man, we are seeing a teenager, amen. He was a young man of Jewish nobility, taken into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon, and then he was renamed Belteshazzar. Please, don't confuse this with Belshazzar, okay? So there is a difference. The Daniel we are talking of is the one who was given the Babylonian name Belteshazzar, but we have the other guy called Belshazzar, serving the king and his successors with loyalty and ability until the time of the Persian conqueror Cyrus. Praise be to God. So that is just a basic understanding of who Daniel was. Now, he is the main character and author of the book of Daniel. He is the main character and author of the book of Daniel. He is, however, mentioned in Matthew 24, verse number 15. Because of time, you will just take you can be sure I've confirmed the verses. Amen. You know, it is good to ascertain that you confirmed the verses. So he is the main character and author of the book of Daniel, and therefore he is the same one who has been mentioned in Matthew 24. Now in Hebrew, Daniel meant God is my judge. Are we together? In Hebrew, Daniel meant God is my judge. But his new name in now the Babylonian language, that is Belteshazzar, meant may God protect his life. Are we together? And we are talking of God the God, not God the sovereign God. Are we together? Because the Babylonian people never believed in God of Israel. Are we together? And that is why when Daniel and the other three men, that is Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, they were being taken so that they go and serve the king. They had to go through a retraining. Are we together? So that they conform to the norms of the Babylonian people. Now, the Bible as well mentions three other individuals of this name. It is better to understand. I'm just giving a background of the shape so that when we are on with Daniel, we can understand who we are talking of. So there are three other Daniels who have been mentioned in the Bible apart from the Daniel the prophet. The first one, there was a legendary Daniel, famed for wisdom and righteousness. You will get that from Ezekiel 14, verse number 14. So a legendary Daniel who was famed for wisdom. There was another Daniel the priest, also went from Babylon to Jerusalem with Ezra the prophet, as mentioned in Ezra chapter number 8 and verse number 2. Are we together? So we have that one, and then we have Daniel the priest. And the third one, there was a son of David called Daniel. If you read that chapter, that not so many people like reading, that as this one begot this one begot this one, until you ask yourself, what revelation can I get from these names? Now, from 1 Chronicles 3 verse 1, you will get that there is one Daniel who was a son to David. But now here, we are giving our focus on Daniel the prophet. Now, Daniel the prophet was only a teenager when introduced in the book of Daniel. Are we together? By the time we are introducing Daniel, in the first chapter of Daniel, Daniel is a teenager, but by the time we come to the end of the book, Daniel was an old man. Are we together? So his life is being seen in that book. There is nothing much that is known about the family lineage of Daniel. There is nothing much that is told about the parents of Daniel. But the one thing that we know, Daniel was a man who was well behaved and brought up, and he was obedient and faithful to whatever he did. Praise be to God. So now, having understand who Daniel was, I want us to look at Daniel's growth and experience. That is, we shall see the life cycle of Daniel, and then after we have seen the life cycle of Daniel, there are lessons that we shall draw about Daniel. Praise be to God. Amen. There are 4 levels that Daniel underwent in his life cycle. And the first one was isolation. So now here, I want us to look at Daniel chapter number 1. Daniel chapter number 1, turn with me, Daniel chapter number 1 and verses number 3. In this, there is something that you shall realize. The Bible says, if I can begin from verse 1, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim king of Judah into his hands, and some of the articles belonging to the house of God, which he carried away to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the articles into the treasure of his God. And the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel. I want you to underline the word some of the children. When we talk of some, we are not talking of everyone. Are we together? So we are selecting a few. So it is talking of to bring some of the children of Israel and of the royal family and of the nobles, young men without blemish, but handsome, with the training in every branch of wisdom. Praise be to God. And therefore, the first thing that went through Daniel's life is that he was isolated. I want you to know that Daniel was among the captives. Are we together? Who had been taken captive in Babylon. And when they had been taken captive in Babylon, so he was among the captives. But there was need to raise up young men. These young men were the same people who were to be trained. So they had to select from the many a few people. And therefore they were isolated from the influences that will mold their thinking and character in the ways of the Lord. Are we together? Remember, the main aim of the king was to ensure that I isolate these men so that they may forget who they are. That was the main goal. Are we together? They were very sharp, but I have to retrain them. I have to retool them so that they might forget. So they have to mold their thinking and character in the ways of the Lord. They were separated from the regular public worship of God. Are we together? And therefore the first thing that went through Daniel's life was first isolation. Are we together? Now, after Daniel has been isolated, now we are ushered to the second phase, indoctrination. Are we together? And that one comes in verse number 4, indoctrination. In this, they were meant to learn the language and literature of the Babylonians. Are we together? You know, today, we conform to the doctrines of the Christian Union. Are we together? I believe there is a constitution that is guided by the doctrines of the Bible, and that constitution is what guides the Christian Union. Are we together? You are seated here today, you come here every Sunday because you believe in the doctrines of the Christian Union. Are we together? I believe you have subscribed, and that is why when you are appointed a leader of the Christian Union, I believe there is that oath of office and oath of allegiance that you usually take. Are we together? That I will conform and I will subscribe to the doctrines of the union. Are we together? And before you are conformed, I usually say, focus, they conduct a lot of training so that you are indoctrinated into the beliefs of the union. Are we together? And therefore, this is something that happened to these people in verse 4. The king wanted to retrain their minds to think as Babylonians. Are we together? And that is why somebody says, so as you think that is who you are. Praise be to God. Because if I can influence your mind, it means I have influenced the person in you. Praise be to God. And therefore, he had to retrain their minds to think as Babylonians rather than as Israelites. Are we together? So the first thing, I isolate them, and then I indoctrinate them. After that, I bring them to a point of compromise. Praise be to God. And that one is seen in verse number 5. And the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's food, and of the wine which he drank, and 3 years training for them, so that at the end of that time they might stand before the king. Praise be to God. So the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's food. Now, in this, they were meant to compromise by eating the king's food. That was also, if you read the study Bible and you read what it meant by the king's food, you will realize that was the same food that was meant to be offered to the gods of the Babylonians. Are we together? And therefore it was good food that was meant for anybody. It was special food. You see, on one side you will feel happy, this is the king's food. But on the other side, it is food that was meant for the gods of the Babylonians. Is somebody following me? Now, by eating that food, it means in one way, they will have compromised their faith in God, and they will have compromised their subscription to the living God, and they will have subscribed to the gods of the Babylonians. Are we together? But you see, these people are talking with their mind. You see, you will not be taking the normal food. And therefore, a normal menu, we have provided a special menu for you. Okay? That you shall be taking a special menu for you. That is the king's food. By doing so, Daniel will have compromised his belief in God. Praise be to God. The king provided them with a special meal that will tempt them to compromise. And you will agree with me that under normal circumstance, as any other human being, you could have come to a point of compromise. Are we together? Wacha tuseme ukweli. Okay? Under normal circumstance, you are there. You have been appointed. You have been taken to State House. And now you are being told you will be dining with the president. You see, here you are struggling. You have become a vegetarian. But you have been given an opportunity, are we together, to become now somebody who consumes pure proteins. Diet is taken in check. There is a starch, there is a carbohydrate, there is some. You see, you will compromise. Are we together? Any other person will have done that. Are we together? But see, there is some wisdom that came with Daniel. Praise be to God. And this is the kind of wisdom, because these are some of the lessons we need to draw from Daniel. Daniel didn't go for man. Praise be to God. Daniel didn't protest. But Daniel instead went with wisdom and offered another solution, which did sound rude. Are we together? And he told that person, now, because you want us to be healthy, allow us to take vegetables, and let the others take the king's food. And after 10 days, you will come and test all of us, and you will see who is more healthier. What that one showed, Daniel knew there is something God will work in their life. Praise be to God. And at the end of it, indeed, Daniel and the four, that is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they came out looking more stronger and healthier than the ones who are consuming the king's delicacies. Praise be to God. So the third phase was compromise. And now the last nail on the coffin was confusion. Praise be to God. So I have isolated you. The second thing I have done is I have indoctrinated these boys. The third one, I'll make them to compromise. And the fourth thing that I will do, I will confuse them. Praise be to God. And this one is seen in Daniel chapter 1 and verse number 7. Now, if I can read in verse number 7. So, you see, they had these names. We had Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Are we together? But what they did, the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. He gave to Daniel the name Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah Shadrach, and to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. Are we together? So what he did was to confuse them. Their names were changed from their original Jewish names to Babylonian names. Are we together? And the names will be called day by day to remind them of the direction they were taking. Praise be to God. If you will read the entire chapter of Daniel, that is I think in chapter 4, you go to chapter number 5, where Daniel is doing interpretations of the dreams. When he comes before the king doesn't address him as Daniel. He addresses him as Belteshazzar. Are we together? So they were being called by their names day in, day out. Are we together? So that they are known by the names which they have been called, and they forget their identity as Israelites, and they conform to their new identity as Babylonians. Are we together? And therefore, that is the cycle that Daniel underwent. Praise be to God. And now, so he went the four phases, which I have summarized in a flow chart. That is isolation, then to indoctrination, then to compromise, and lastly to confusion. Are we together? Now, those were the four phases that this man went through. But after undergoing these four phases, now came the real character of Daniel. And I want us to have a look at a day in Daniel's life. Praise be to God. So after this had been done, the four phases had gone through Daniel's life. Remember, at the last phase, that is the confusion phase, where their names had been changed, now something had to happen. And because of time, I might not give the whole story, but the brief story about this. is after Daniel had been trained, they became very wise. Are we together? And they were interpreting the dreams which the sorcerers and the wise men of the Babylonians could not interpret. Are we together? And this made Daniel and his fellow three men, that is Azariah, Mishael, and Hananiah, the famously known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to have favor before the king. Are we together? And therefore they were put in charge of various leadership positions. Are we together? And we see Daniel ending up becoming a governor. Are we together? And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were made to be ministers. I'm just going through very fast. And now, every other time, Daniel could shine. Are we together? And this brought confrontation with the other Babylonian governors. Are we together? So they had an issue with Daniel. Kuna ile naweza sema in other language you can call kiwaru. Are we together? So they were jealous of the accomplishments of Daniel. And they tried to look at how can we pin down Daniel. Are we together? How can we bring down this man? And they found no loophole where they could pin Daniel. And the only thing now they could do, they came to a point and said, we shall come up with a law. Praise be to God. We shall make the king to sign a law that everyone should do what? Everyone should worship the Babylonian God. Praise be to God. Because why did they do so? They had studied Daniel and they knew Daniel was a man of devotion. Praise be to God. And he was giving himself to devotion 3 times a day. In the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening. Praise be to God. And therefore they knew Daniel, the only way to pin him is to come up with a law that will go against his worship. Praise be to God. So that they can pin him down. And now they confiscated a skin. And now we come to a day in Daniel's life. I've summarized the entire experience. I've broken it to the seasons of the day just to help us understand the phases how Daniel went through to encourage someone this morning. Praise be to God. And therefore, Daniel's day began with the dawn of devotion. Praise be to God. The dawn of what? Of devotion. Daniel was a man of prayer. So we have skipped now, we have done the training from chapter 1, now we have seen this man doing the interpretation, interpreting the dreams in chapter 2 all the way to chapter 5. Now in chapter 6 is where now it all begins. Praise be to God. Now this is where all hell breaks loose. Bwana Yesu asifiwe. Now, so the first phase in Daniel's life was the dawn of devotion. Daniel was a man of prayer, not only during trial, but always. The Bible says in verse 10, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, are we together? Now, when Daniel knew, in other words, what he says, Daniel had already understood that his fellow governors had schemed against him. Are we together? And he had understood there was something that was being cooked against me. Are we together? And what did Daniel do? How did he begin his day? He began his day with devotion. Praise be to God. And that is why it says, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house. Praise be to God. And his windows being open in his chamber towards Jerusalem. Remember Jerusalem, it was a sign of towards their God. Are we together? He kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. Other versions will say as he did every time. If you read the NIV, praise be to God. So therefore Daniel will begin with devotion. Daniel was a man of devotion. Praise be to God. He prayed 3 times as quoted in Psalms 55 verse 17, that evening and morning and at noon I will pray and cry out aloud, and he will hear my voice. Praise be to God. And therefore the life of Daniel began with devotion. After the dawn of devotion came the morning of deception. Praise be to God. So we were at the dawn of devotion. Now we are coming to the morning of deception. Accusations were made against Daniel. Are we together? So these people now came up with accusations. And according to the accusers, the following accusations were to be presented to the king against Daniel. Praise be to God. The first one was a repulsive crime, that Daniel himself was seeking his destruction by worshipping the God without consulting the Babylonians. Are we together? The second crime was a race crime. Because if you read Daniel 6 verse 13, one of the accusations they are making is that, if I can pick just that verse number 13, it says, then they answered and said to the king that Daniel, who is one of those captives, so hata kando na yeye kufanya, he is a captive already. Are we together? And you see, a captive is worse than a native, right? Because a native has a right to citizenship, but a captive is taken as someone who is there for wrong reasons. He is there to serve the natives. Are we together? And therefore, and the third crime is that Daniel had committed a religious crime of not recognizing the king and his God. Praise be to God. And that is how the morning of Daniel was looking like. A morning of deception. They were going to deceive the king. Are we together? Against who? Against Daniel. And then came the noon of decision. The noon decision came. So we begin from the dawn to the morning. Now we are at noon. At noon, Daniel knew that a decision had been made against him. Praise be to God. His accusers had come into a common agreement to present Daniel before the king. Praise be to God. And having understood this, there are 2 things that Daniel illustrated. The first thing that Daniel illustrated was dedication. He dedicated himself to prayer and in faith in God. There is something in his prayer was saying, that I will pray because I know God shall hear me. Praise be to God. You know, when you pray by saying God shall hear me, it means you are acknowledging and you have faith in the saving power of God. Are we together? And therefore he showed dedication, and he also proved his determination as he did aforetime or every other time. Praise be to God. So by no time a decision, the accusations have been made, and a decision has been made. Let's see what happens in the evening. Now comes the evening of disappointment. Are we together? It follows the evening of disappointment. That is in chapter number 6 verse 16 to 17. Those who schemed against Daniel thought Daniel will submit to the king's demands. Praise be to God. You see, these people were looking for ways to pin down this man. Are we together? And they knew, because they are trying to look at every other point where they can access this man, but they could not get. But they knew if we test him through his faith, we will get him. Are we together? And so, by evening, having the decision has been made, those who schemed against Daniel thought Daniel will submit to the king's demand. But they were disappointed. Praise be to God. And even the king believed that Daniel was not going to survive. It's something that pleases me with this king. You know, and this king knew something about Daniel, right from how Daniel was interpreting the dreams. He could recognize Daniel. Are we together? And a half of his mind could tell Daniel, as much as I'm taking him to the lion's den, this man is innocent. Are we together? And that is why he sealed the lion's den with his own seal. That is what it means. No other person will open. He did this purposely. If you read the study Bible, it says he did this purpose to ensure that is the only plan that will be done. Because he says, if I don't ensure that this is not the only plan, these other people can do other plans. Is somebody getting me? He believed these people can scheme again, even apart from, if this plan fails, they might come up with another plan. So he did that to ensure that is the only plan. Are we together? And therefore, that is why sometimes we usually say, we as Christians maintain the cause of your salvation. Praise be to God. The king, and he will, as you read, you will realize as much as Daniel was in the lion's den, in the king's bedroom there was no sleep. Praise be to God. The king did not sleep. He was disturbed. And what the study Bible tells you is that if the king had power, he could have not done what he did against Daniel. Are we together? But because he is the king of the Babylonians, and he didn't want to get the opposition against the Babylonians, he had to do what his leaders were telling him. Are we together? So we are seeing a king who is doing something that is not willing to do. Praise be to God. Nevertheless, he did. But the governors who had schemed against Daniel, they were disappointed when Daniel submitted to the plan. Praise be to God. After the disappointment came the night of deliverance. Praise be to God. The night of deliverance. That is why in that evening, once it came in the morning, the first thing the king did, he woke up and went straight to the lion's den. And he called out aloud the name of Daniel. Praise be to God. And said, Daniel, did your God save you? And see what Daniel told him in verse number 20. If you read Daniel 6:20 through 21. My God sent his angel to shut the lion's mouth so that they will not hurt me. For I have been found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. Praise be to God. The night of what? The night of deliverance. In the night came deliverance. Praise be to God. Amen. At the right time, God came through for Daniel and saved him from the lions. Having delivered him, came now the morning of declaration. Praise be to God. The morning of declaration. After witnessing the supremacy of God, the king gave out a decree that all men and dominions should fear and tremble before the God of Daniel. I want you to see where it all began from. Praise be to God. Someone in the morning who has been accused. A deception has been made. A judgment has been given. He has been put in the lion's den. But now they are seeing the deliverance. Up to this point, the king now arose. He had all the reasons to prove to the Babylonian leaders that the God of Daniel is the one true God. And what we see from this is that Daniel's trials caused transformation in Babylon. Praise be to God. Amen. And in all this, from all that we have said, from this life of Daniel, now we come and ask ourselves, what lessons can we derive from the life of Daniel? Praise be to God. What lessons can we get from the life of Daniel? The first one which I want us to take home was that Daniel wasn't willing to compromise his standards. Praise be to God. This is something that comes out very clearly in the life of Daniel. Daniel didn't have to uphold his Jewish standards. By the way, it was not a must for him to uphold those standards. Praise be to God. He was away from home in a foreign pagan kingdom without his parents around. He could have eaten the food without a second thought. Praise be to God. But he didn't. There is a small error there. It is written, but he did. It should be, but he didn't. Praise be to God. He could have taken. He was in a foreign pagan kingdom. Nobody could have blamed him for consuming that food. Praise be to God. Otherwise, his reputation could have gone higher. It didn't matter what everyone around him was doing. He wasn't going to compromise. Praise be to God. And that is why, as followers of Christ, we have to decide up front, just like Daniel, that we are not going to compromise our biblical principles no matter what. Praise be to Jesus. Ask your neighbor, have you ever compromised?
Have you ever compromised?
Praise be to God. You know, especially during fasting period. Na sijui shetani naye anania gani. Na hiyo ndio wakati unatolewa form vibaya. And you see, the prayer coordinator is here rallying members. Let us meet in Gethsemane forest. And your neighbor tells you, there is a serious party here. Na unajua vile umevumilia kukula USA, ugali, sukuma, avocado, from Monday to Monday. Praise be to God. And then form imejileta. Deep in your spirit you feel, I should go on with this fasting. Hey, but kuna kakuku hapo kanakuambia, hello. Okay. Unioni? Assume that is not enough. Somebody tells you, you don't need even to mind about your fare. Kesho kuna group tunaenda Ombabe. Just, we want your presence. Praise be to God. Whatever you shall eat, your fare is on our part. Now you ask Jesus, what is this? Praise be to God. Have you ever done that exam? Na hiyo kati ukararua namba ya simu. Now you ask yourself, the soup is just near me. I had a 07. And that is the time you decide now to be part of the formation. Na mnaunda formation. Praise be to God. You make a pattern. You are compromising. Praise be to God. And that is why I usually tell people, it is better you get even a second class lower that is born again than a first class that is not of God. Praise be to God. Never do what? Never compromise. Daniel was not a man who could compromise. Praise be to God. No matter what the rest were doing, he chose to do what he believed was right. The second lesson we get from Daniel is that God was the central aspect of Daniel's life. Part of Daniel's daily routine was to kneel towards Jerusalem from his window and to pray to God 3 times a day. Everything in Daniel's life revolved around God. Praise be to God. We are supposed to love God with all our hearts, with our souls, and with our mind. That is why the Bible says that love your God with all your soul, with all your heart, and with all your mind. Don't push God back to just being a part of your life, but let Him be the life. Praise be to God. Don't make God to be part of your life. Don't make God to be part of your academics. Make God your academics. Praise be to God. Make God your life. God was the central thing in Daniel's life. In everything, he consulted God. And the third lesson that we get from the life of Daniel, Daniel used his influence. Praise be to God. Daniel used his influence. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter which position you are. What Daniel teaches us, wherever you are, you can cause a difference. Praise be to God. Wherever you are, you matter. Wherever you are, there is a difference you can bring. In chapter 2 of that book of Daniel, after he interpreted King Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the king proclaimed that truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings. That is 2 verse number 47. Praise be to God. Daniel used his influence to influence the king of Babylon. Are we together? You can use your position to influence other things. Praise be to God. Don't assume that you are just a student. Don't assume that you are just a member of the union. You can be the reason to take this union to another level. Praise be to God. God can use you to influence this university. Praise be to God. You are not too small to cause a difference. And we have seen a number of people who have used their position to influence decisions. Praise be to God. And that is why even in the book of Esther, Mordecai is telling Esther, Esther, you don't know why God has put you in that position at such a time. Praise be to God. Esther was seeing herself as an orphan, but she uses her position to influence and save her people. Praise be to God. When Apostle Paul is taken to prison, Apostle Paul is in the Roman prison, and we are seeing him as a prisoner. And in his letter to the Romans, he says, as much as I am in prison, I have used my power here in prison to influence and to preach the gospel to the emperor of Rome. Praise be to God. And by the time he's sending Philemon out of captive, he's saying, I'm sending Philemon as much as he was a captive, but receive him because he has undergone transformation. Praise be to God. And we are seeing there is a lot that Paul accomplishes while he is in prison. Praise be to God. You might not be in a position to make laws as Rema can do the laws in this union. Praise be to God. In our time in university, we were believing university bila maandamano, hiyo ni college. That is what we were saying. Without maandamano, there is nothing. That is the language we used to understand. Praise be to God. But we have seen people who have used the right channels and they have influenced their places of work positively. Praise be to God. I challenge you this morning that wherever you are, whatever you do, it doesn't matter how small it is. Because one philosopher once said, if you cannot do greater things, then do smaller things in a greater way. Praise be to God. It doesn't matter what you are doing. Do that small thing that you are doing in a greater way. Praise be to God. And desire to bring a difference. This isn't the only time, however. In chapter 6 and verse number 25 through 27, after King Darius sees Daniel was spared from being eaten by the lions, he decrees that no one should worship anyone but the God of Daniel. Again, Daniel used his influence in an extremely positive and powerful way. What does it tell us? Even our tribulations can bring salvation to people. Praise be to God. Sometimes we need to get to positions whereby we have to take risks for the sake of the gospel. Praise be to God. While we as Christians today, we may never be able to have influence in changing laws like Daniel did, our influence can still be used for God's glory. Praise be to God. Our influence can be used to glorify God. Bwana Yesu asifiwe.
Amen.
And the last lesson we get from the life of Daniel is that Daniel didn't waver when hardships arose. Praise be to God. Daniel didn't waver when hardships arose. The other administrators working under King Darius were exceedingly jealous of the king's favoritism towards Daniel, as well as his renewed success as governor. Praise be to God. So they tried to find something they could charge Daniel with, either in his ruling skills or his personal life that will diminish his influence with the king. So these satraps and governors trick the king into signing a law, basically forbidding in the kingdom to worship anyone as God besides Darius. It wasn't like Daniel wasn't aware of the new decree. He was completely aware, but that didn't matter to him. Praise be to God. Again, pleasing God was the most important thing to him. That is why in John 15 verse 20, as much as we are born again, persecutions are bound to happen. Praise be to God. Many are the afflictions of the righteous. Praise be to God. Many are the afflictions. When we come to salvation, you are not welcome to the bed of roses. Praise be to God. You come to a higher level of suffering. You come to a higher level of struggle. But grateful is our God. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but God saved them from them all. Praise be to God. There is a promise attached. It is crystal clear that if we are following Christ the way we should, we are going to suffer persecution. Praise be to God. Either way, it is crucial that we don't succumb or yield to the enemy's advances. Praise be to God. Even when you feel like nyota imeenda, praise be to God. Never waver, but stick to this God. Praise be to God. Stick to this God. He never wavered. Never waver in your faith. That is what Daniel teaches us. As I conclude, I want to say that Daniel's life was an example of a committed man of God. His commitment did make a difference. If you can forget anything, then remember this, that Christianity without commitment is always Christianity without Christ. Praise be to God. Christianity without commitment is always Christianity without Christ. Bwana Yesu asifiwe. You will be more of a participator. God wants people who sacrifice. Bwana Yesu asifiwe. I usually tell people you can do more than attending a Sunday service. Praise be to God. God rewards those who serve, not those who sit. Praise be to God. Just like Daniel, our first priority should be whether or not we are serving and honoring God. Is someone blessed this morning? There is something Daniel teaches us, that let us always ensure in our life we don't compromise our standards. We make God the central aspect in our life. We use our influence to influence the things around us. And lastly, we ensure that we don't waver when hardships are ours. Let's be